Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and we are delighted to be partnering with our German Circle of Friends, the Freunde des American Council on Germany e.V., to host today's event. Thank you all for joining us. As the last few weeks have shown, German politics is exciting. While we have some clarity following Sunday's election, there are still a lot of open questions about the contours of the new German government and its foreign policy priorities. To help us answer some of those questions, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our panel for a discussion about Germany's role on the world stage after Angela Merkel. We're joined by Dr. Stefan Fröhlich. He's professor of international politics and political economy at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg. His fields of research include EU foreign economic and security policy, transatlantic relations, as well as German foreign economic and security policy. He, as our other guest as well, is a frequent commentator in the German and international media. Stefan, herzlich willkommen.
Thanks a lot. Welcome.
We're also joined by ACG board member, Dr. Charles Kupchan. He is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a professor of international affairs at Georgetown University. He served in the Obama and Clinton administrations and is also well-published and the author of many books. Charlie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Very good to be with all of you. Thanks, Steve.
Today's discussion will be moderated by ACG Young Leader alumna, Sonja Gillert. She serves as the head of audio for Welt and recently joined the board of our German Freundeskreis. Before taking on her current role at Welt, she served as an editor in the paper's foreign policy department and was based in Berlin. Let me remind our viewers one more time that if you have questions during today's event, you can submit them using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to fold your questions into the discussion. And with that, Sonja, it's over to you. I'm very much looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Charles, for being here. And also to all viewers, a welcome from my side. I'm happy that you're with us. And as Steve said, the idea is also to answer your questions. So please use the Q&A chat for your questions. Steve already said it's about foreign policy priorities. We want to talk about Germany's role on the world stage after 16 years of Angela Merkel. But before we dive in, I want to give you a quick overview where we stand at the moment when it comes to forming a government in Germany. So last night was a very exciting night because the talks between the parties about coalitions to form a government have started. Last night, the Green Party and the pro-business liberal Free Democratic Party met. And today, the internet is full of jokes because both parties took selfies, and it looks a little bit like they formed a band last night. It's worth looking it up on Twitter. Right now, it looks most likely like a traffic light coalition could be formed. In Germany, we like to have catchy names for possible coalitions. Traffic light means red, the center-left Social Democrats, yellow for the Free Democratic Party, and green for the Green Party, of course. However, the so-called Jamaica coalition is also still on the table. Jamaica coalition means it includes the CDU-CSU, the Conservative Alliance, the Green Party, and the Free Democratic Party. Anyway, for both possible coalitions, the challenges on an international level would be pretty similar. And that's why I would like to kick off with a question to both of you, Stefan and Charles. I would like to know your opinion on which are, from your perspective, the two major challenges in foreign politics for a new German government, and of course, which characteristics, which features would a chancellor, a new government need to meet these challenges? Maybe, Charles, would you like to start?
Sure. And maybe before I specifically address that question, Sonja, I'll give an initial reaction and this will sound kind of strange, but as someone who's in Washington, D.C. and who lived through the Trump era, my main takeaway from the German election is, thank God it went smoothly and normally, because here we're looking at a potential return of Trump, a constitutional crisis. Biden is struggling to get two critical pieces of legislation through the Congress, and the Democrats can't even agree. And so it's liberal democracy over here is still in crisis. And so to be here and watch the election unfold in Germany is really, let me put it this way, normal is exceptional in this day and age. And so to have had the election go smoothly, and now the parties are sitting down and trying to work out a coalition, we desperately need a kind of big democracy functioning normally, behaving sensibly. And so it looks like that's what's happening in Germany. And that to me is in some ways the big story. Normal is exceptional.
So you would say the first domestic challenge is already met and already solved to form or to have an election which went smoothly.
Yeah, and that's because for me, the biggest threat that we face collectively is us. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's not the Taliban. It is that the liberal democratic world, the anchor of a liberal democratic system, has been very shaky of late. And here in the United States, we've had a swing back to the political center, but we're not out of the woods. This story is not yet concluded. And so to see an election that goes smoothly, and the other takeaway is the center has held. Yes, center left and center right have been shrinking in Germany, but the Greens have done well by tacking to the center. And so you have, whatever the outcome of the coalition negotiations, you'll have in Germany a government that still resides somewhere in the broad political center of European politics. And that to me is a very reassuring outcome. In fact, AfD declined, right? They fell by a few percentage points. That's an important story, especially amid a pandemic, which could have had exactly the opposite effect, right? The disruption of the pandemic has not given wind to the populists. That again is good news. The story's not over, but so far so good in Germany and continental Europe more broadly. So to get directly to your question, I guess I would say two things. One is to have a German government that is aware that the future of liberal democracy is at stake here, and that focuses on the big questions of the future of work, the digitalization of the German economy, dealing with economic uncertainty, dealing with immigration. In other words, developing an agenda that would be in some ways the counterpart of what Biden is doing, because I think he's doing the right thing. I think he understands that the United States is going through a profound political crisis that needs big ideas and bold moves. And I think Europe needs to do the same. And then the second would be a government that is ready to provide leadership. And, I guess one question I had, Merkel has she's been an anchor. She's been like a piece of granite that has anchored German politics. She's anchored European politics. In some respects, she's anchored the transatlantic relationship. Can the next chancellor do that? Can the next chancellor be the partner on global challenges, on China and Russia? Or because this is somebody new and because the coalition could perhaps be a big tent and maybe a little bit dysfunctional, will Germany become not more bold, but even less bold? So that would, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Charles. I would like to hand the piece of granite picture over to you, Stefan, because the piece of granite can be something good and strong, but it can be also something that stops you from moving and makes it feel hard to go forward. So how do you see that piece of granite picture? And maybe it's also connected to challenges on the international level you see for Germany.
Thank you very much, Sonja. And let me start by, first of all, saying I think there's nothing to add to what Charles just said. So that spares me from making any additional remarks on the positive outcome and the positive aspect of these elections. And that is certainly right. And by the way, Charles, also left wing, certainly not extremists or radicals or whatever, did not prevail, and that basically the center actually is, as a matter of fact, as I think Joe Biden also said, is stable. I think I found it quite interesting what his first reaction was when he was told that the SPD was expected to beat the CDU, saying they are solid. So both are solid, and what that means for transatlantic relations, we can discuss it. I'm not sure whether they're as solid, let's say, an SPD-led government as, let's say, a CDU-led government might be, but we can discuss that. And I think what Sonja said at the very beginning, it's very, very likely that it turns out to be a traffic light coalition. Let me be frank. This is what you get from so far from the negotiations, pretty much, and from the waning actually support for Mr. Laschet within the party and in the fraction, his party. With that, let me come to the but. What also, because we're talking about foreign policy issues, and you were asking for what are the priorities, what should be the priorities for the next government. I think once again, unfortunately, that is my first general observation. It was my first general observation here. Foreign policy issues were almost absent in this election campaign. I happen to really comment on there was only one debate on foreign policy issues between the three candidates, and it was only one TV station that reported on that. It was Phoenix. I was the one to comment on this debate for Phoenix. But once again, I think this is quite remarkable. I think no party really laid out a strategic vision. Clear priorities on, let's say, the position of the country in the world economy, on issues like resilience, security, all fields in which the systemic conflict actually is playing out. So I think Timothy Garton Ash, many of you will know him, he rightly stated and commented on this by saying we have a world full of crisis actually, and there isn't any sense of a real crisis in Germany. That's really true, and that is maybe also part of the Merkel legacy. Normalcy, stability, continuity, that's what Germans like and love. So I think there are many challenges. You were asking, Sonja, for, let's say, the 2 or 3 most crucial ones, and I would definitely nevertheless start with defense. I've been working on that for many years, and I've just written, Stephen, we had a presentation of the book 2 years ago, or 1 year ago actually, in New York. I was very positive in my last book on German foreign policy, ending on a positive note that we're heading into the right direction. But overall, I think the pendulum right now is swinging back a little bit, or has swung back in the last 3-4 years. The last term of Angela Merkel, for various reasons, unfortunately. So I think one of the key challenges will remain Germany's restraint on defense, which remains a defining factor. Defense has, and that is probably the most crucial point, has little public support. remains controversial in this country and does not figure high on the policy agenda. So I think we can discuss that later on, but I think it is a crucial challenge. The other is, I think Charles has already alluded to that and pointed out that how important that is. I would call it just make sure who your partner is. It is essential, I think, to maintain proven partnerships and, of course, also remain, as Merkel certainly was, one of the strongholds and maybe the stronghold of European integration and alliances. So, this needs to go beyond the EU, especially, of course, with your country, with the United States, but also with the United Kingdom. And here, I think what is essential is, and we can discuss this later on, that I think we should stop. This was particular what Germany was prone to do during the Trump era. We should stop the politics of equidistance between China and the US. Biden and the Biden administration will certainly put pressure on Germany and has already. And I think, we have to make clear where we stand. That does not mean we should give up on China, etc. We should have a China strategy, but nevertheless, I think it's very crucial and essential that we reach out to our, partners in the United States and to this administration. My third point, I think, and the third big challenge definitely is, and this is, of course, has a domestic dimension, but as well as an international one, and that is climate change. And I think, and digitalization, all these challenges ahead of us. And I think here it's interesting to see that there's, of course, a lot of common ground also with the US, with this administration, which to me, actually, in terms of its agenda, is getting closer, actually becoming quite European in many ways, or there is an agenda. And I think climate change is certainly the key challenge, and the key challenge here is not only to watch it, what would the domestic agenda, but basically to convince the rest of the world to tackle climate change. And here Berlin will need to lead an example, I think, in the future. So I think these are the most crucial challenges for any government. I stop here, Sonja.
Yeah, actually climate change might also be an issue which brings together different players, Russia, China, the US, the EU, as it already has started to bring together people. You mentioned the reaction of the US president to hearing about the Social Democrats. Charles, I would like to get back to that because Biden said they are solid, and I'm wondering if that is something that is expected or even wished for by the US administration, since there are so many aspects talking about defense, for example, where progress or more responsibility of the European Union, but also Germany might be necessary. How do you see that? Is solid enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that unlike here in the United States, where an election can have a huge impact, we see that as we've gone from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden. I mean, we're all suffering from whiplash. Every time the White House changes hands, American policy changes dramatically. And, I think I don't think we're going to see a lot of whiplash coming out of this election. I don't expect to see, dramatically different policies coming out of a coalition led by the Social Democrats, and that's because, as we've both been saying, the center is holding in Germany. But I share Stefan's concern about the defense issue, in part because, my sense is that the Social Democrats and the Greens are even softer and more cautious about the defense issue than the Christian Democrats, and that as a consequence, there will even be less readiness to move forward on this issue. And that could be a problem for three different respects. One is, I think the United States is in retrenchment mode from the broader Middle East. That will continue. Biden got out of Afghanistan because I think he said, I have to. And it was ugly and it was bumpy and it caused discord. But Europe does need to be ready to do more in its broader neighborhood of the Mediterranean, because the United States isn't going to do it. And so there's a gap that needs to be filled. The second issue is, I think there will be great sensitivity to the degree to which Europe is able to be a stronger pillar in the Atlantic relationship. That debate is not going away. It's going to get stronger. Democrats and Republicans alike want to see our allies shoulder more. And I think the Atlantic Alliance will get stronger if there is more capability on the European side. And let's be honest, Germany is crucial here, right? This will not happen if Germany doesn't play a more important role. And then finally, I think it would be good for Europe. I mean, Macron is pushing this. I'm not comfortable with the strategic autonomy idea. Many Germans are not either. And so I think Germany, if it's going to shape this debate, needs to be a player, and it needs to be forward-leaning on the defense issue. And then one quick word on China. It is a critical issue in the sense that it animates American foreign policy right now. It's the one area where you can find bipartisan agreement. And to put it bluntly, I don't think we have a strategy. I think we have a policy, which is to balance against China and the recent sub-deal with Australia, which was a bit of a fiasco when it came to U.S. relations with France. And I think the EU more generally, maybe we could talk about that a little bit later. But in general, I think there needs to be a transatlantic conversation and a conversation between Berlin and Washington about how much balancing is enough, how much balancing is too much, what's the sweet spot between standing up to China and engaging China. Because listen, China is a full service superpower in a way that the Soviet Union was never. Right? It is spreading across Eurasia. It is already in Africa. It is building out roads and networks around the world. We have to figure out a strategy, and Americans need the input of Europeans on this. This should not be a one-way conversation.
Thank you very much, Charles. Before we get back to the European Union, I would like to ask you a question, Stefan, about the China policy also, because we have one question from the viewers. The question is, do you think what Charles already mentioned might happen, that there is a more common approach of the US and the EU or Germany with, for example, the Green Party in the government, who are much more outspoken when it comes to tougher measures, when it comes to human rights violations and so on? Is that a realistic scenario from your point of view?
Thanks for the question. I would start by saying, get the expectations right. From what we read in the party programs, it's quite interesting to see. And the first impression would be also from the candidates during the election campaign, that the problem, if it comes particularly to secure and defense issues and foreign policy issues in general, is not the Green Party and the FDP. As a matter of fact, the decisive or the most decisive differences are among or between the CDU and the SPD. You wouldn't believe it. The Greens and the FDP have pretty much in common. Though, of course, party leaders, we all know that, of the Greens will certainly have to struggle with their party base over the NATO's 2% target, German nuclear participation, drones, and so forth. The problem here is that within the Green, there is a huge gap there has been a gap, an astonishing gap between what the candidate actually proclaimed and suggested, and what the party says and the party program says, which is quite interesting. So I heard, of course, and I realized that in Washington, everybody was welcoming, of course, her top words on China and on Russia and autocratic regimes and so forth. Yes. And I believe what Annalena Baerbock said, she really meant that. But the question will be, of course, how much leverage will she have within her own party with regard to these issues? That said, I would once again say, come back to the China question in a second, but let me add one more word on the SPD or a CDU-led government, because they will nevertheless be the party of the chancellor. They will represent the party of the chancellor, the next chancellor. So I think they will, of course, remain both supportive of a more wide-reaching European foreign policy, but without full German assent. Building hard power instruments for the EU will, if at all, I think if it all happen with the CDU left rather than with an SPD left government. I have some doubts. The interesting thing is that with a traffic light coalition, I think it might become easier, and you might see more cooperation on new challenges like China, climate change, and all these issues. But not so much in case of the Transatlantic Defense Alliance. So this would be rather, and vice versa. For the CDU, it seems to be they're closer if it comes to the defense issue. But as we've seen with Angela Merkel, she was actually very cautious in her politics vis-a-vis China, or towards China. And so for this reason, it will be interesting to see how this will unfold. But once again, if it comes to defense, be aware that given that the SPD membership still heavily opposes drones for the Bundeswehr, the 2% also, I mean, Scholz, once again, has the same problem as Annalena Baerbock had. Where is the support within the party for issues like 2%, etc.? Take Rolf Mützenich and many others, actually, who are really, and the party leaders, Borjans and Askens, who are way more skeptical about these issues. So I have no idea where this will end up. Here we might face more problems than under a CDU-led government. On China, I would really expect, by the way, also the FDP has been very outspoken with regard to China, Russia, and the autocratic regime. So I see a lot of potential here for a government which would signal that it is making the necessary changes to its China policy by developing a China strategy that, while continuing to seek cooperation, reduces nevertheless the country's exposure to blackmail and to better protect German interests. This might, as a matter of fact, happen because this is what the FDP and the Greens are supportive of.
Thank you, Stefan. I just read an article where you were quoted, Charles, and it came up the idea of a division of labor between Germany and the United States when it comes to certain foreign policy issues or international conflicts. Could you elaborate on that? I thought that's a very interesting idea, that we don't have to be on the same page, as far as I understood, in every detail, and there could be more of a separation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the notion of rebalancing is important here, in the sense that some people say a division of labor, Europe does Europe and the United States is going to do the Asia Pacific. I don't back that kind of division. I think it's important that we stay on the same page, but that we shift the allocation of responsibility so that the United States stays a European power, but looks to its European partners to do more. And that's why the issues that Stefan was just talking about are important here. And will there be a readiness to do more on defense. And in my mind, it's less about 2% and the actual amount of defense spending. It's more about turning current levels of spending or increased levels of spending into more output, so that there is more capability, more pooling of resources, more effort to rationalize defense spending across the European unions. This is as much a kind of issue of political coordination as it is defense spending. And I would, I'm not someone who thinks that we're going to suddenly see the German high seas fleet be rebuilt and show up in the Taiwan Straits. That's not going to happen. But I do think that Europe should be a partner of the United States in the Asia Pacific when it comes to the broad range of issues. And here, maybe I'll pose this as a question to Stefan. Commercialism. Merkel is someone who, when it comes to China and also on Nord Stream 2, was quite mindful of the commercial importance of engagement with Russia, and even more so with China. Does that change at all? Is there a recalculation, particularly on the China front, that could come about through a new coalition? After all, the Social Democrats were as supportive or more supportive of Nord Stream 2 as the CDU. So can one expect a re-weighting of the importance of the commercial connection to China if you have a new government?
Shall I?
Yeah, please, Stefan, please, yeah.
Thanks, Charles, for this question. Before I come to that, let me maybe also add one more point, and I very much agree with almost everything you said on the defense issue and also the division of labor. I think this is quite interesting. As you said, usually this goes on both sides of the Atlantic. We know that. We have had so many discussions on that. Europeans should take care of their periphery, and the US anyway is balancing towards Asia Pacific. And this has been going on for more than 10 years now, by the way. So this is not new, not a new phenomenon. But I think what is really, particularly also under the new administration in Washington, what we should really get used to here in Europe is that the US has very much, in terms of, let's say, the last 15, 20 years, we have seen Afghanistan, Iraq, we have seen the humanitarian interventions, a Western invention, as a matter of fact. And I think this era has probably come to, at least, I think, for the moment, to an end. And the US has become quite a normal country under the new administration, with an agenda which, as I said, tackles the issues Europeans also would like to tackle: digitalization, climate change, the home front, etc. The US will not be, I wouldn't share the interpretation of some of my colleagues here or Europe. Let's say the US will become isolationist or unilateral. Also, this is a signal of or sign of unilateralism, the Australian deal and Afghanistan, the withdrawal. I mean, there are these complaints here, but what can Europe complain about that? Actually, we have been part of that, and we couldn't have done all that without the US support. That's what I always try to tell my colleagues here. But one thing is for sure, I think, so it will not become isolationist, and it will, I think, work effectively where it's possible. For instance, China with allies, but only when its vital interests are at stake. That's what the administration said. I think this is common sense among Democrats and Republicans. Charles, you better know than I do, but I think this is the situation right now. And it sees those interests in the competition with China. So increasingly, however, in places such as Central Asia, the Sahel, and perhaps even Europe's eastern neighborhood, it does not see that as its vital interest, and it is very much a European interest, and Europeans, as a matter of fact, not just due to the proximity, actually has a direct interest at stake in those places. So we need to develop this kind of capability. And be it what everybody hopes for, and particularly this is a German position, other maybe Macron's position, everything we do to, let's say, to strengthen our strategic resilience and strategic autonomy is also meant to strengthen, of course, a European pillar within NATO. There's no doubt about that. I think this goes for any administration, be it a CDU-led government or an SPD-led government. But once again, I mean, after Afghanistan, etc., I think this is a way we're heading to. And that needs also, by the way, some sort of, though I know that Americans have always been skeptical about that, this also needs some sort of duplication in terms of capabilities, as a matter of fact. That's certainly true. So it would be, of course, very helpful, as Charles also said, not only to spend wisely, the 2%, and I think we make too much fuss about the 2%. It's rather an issue of do we invest into the right, technology, into the right equipment, what we do need, instead of money. So that is, I think, my point on where we're heading to with regard to defense. With regard to China, once again, I think, yes, I do see, Charles, to answer your question, I do see potential. And as a matter of fact, as I already said, maybe under an SPD-led government, which is more outspoken if it comes to not only the climate change issue, but also if it comes to human rights, upholding human rights, etc., as the Greens, by the way, and the FDP. So, and that automatically means that there are some voices within the SPD and also among the Greens saying that we are overestimating and over-impacting, let's say, our dependence on China. Let me state that very clearly here. You should know that this country, Germany, still, does trade predominantly with its European partners and member states, and the European member states. 60% of our trade, almost 60%, more than half of our trade, goes into the European Union.
On the other hand, Stefan, sorry for interrupting, but on the other hand, we also saw that China is for the European Union, and trade in the European Union more important than the United States already.
No, but the share here is, once again, 7 to 8% for both China and the United States. Just to keep that in mind. And what I'm saying is also there are voices, more and more voices. People are becoming more critically, and the German government's Indo-Pacific guidelines pointing to that direction also, that we maybe overestimate and overstate our dependence on China. This is never, as in the case of Russia, a one-way street. Of course, we're living in an interconnected world. I don't have to explain that to anybody, of course. And there are mutual dependencies. This is not a one-way street. The same is true for Russia. And for that reason, also in the context of the EU, you mentioned the EU, China accounts, but 6 to 7% for 6 to 7% of the EU's trade, global trade. I think some people are really not aware of the proportions. We're over-impacting that. And there is this regulatory power of the EU and the economic power of the EU as well, which we shouldn't underestimate. And there are voices within, particularly the SPD and also the Greens, who are trying to make that, raise their voices to be a little bit more realistic and pragmatic if it comes, and less pragmatic maybe than the former chancellor was if it comes to China, and that goes also for the economic relationship. So we'll have to see, but I think it's getting into that direction.
Thank you, Stefan. You also mentioned Russia before. I would like to know from you, Charles, with the Social Democrats who also support the Nord Stream 2 deal, it doesn't seem that there will be much change, I would say, even though the Green Party doesn't support Nord Stream 2. From a US perspective, do you think that the issues coming from that also for the transatlantic relations will be underestimated when we're looking into the future? And what would you wish for? How would you convince maybe the Social Democrats from a US perspective to change their position?
Yeah. You know, I think that Russia is in some ways a big question mark for me when it comes to the transatlantic relationship, because on the one hand, Putin shows no signs of changing his tune on any front, whether it's Georgia, Ukraine, Syria, human rights, hacking into American and German computer systems. He seems to have a formula for maintaining his legitimacy that is heavily reliant on confrontation with the West. At the same time, I think that there is beneath the surface more fluidity than meets the eye, in part because of China. And when I try to figure out, why did Biden sit down with Putin in Geneva? Why did he eventually decide to let Nord Stream 2 be completed? Why has he not been more vocal and engaged on Ukraine? I'm just guessing here because I don't know. I haven't been talking to the Biden team. But I think part of the discussion here is potentially about putting some distance between Moscow and Beijing as a way of dealing with a rising China, right? On the one hand, we build a coalition of democracies to stand up to China. On the other hand, our only real option for weakening China's hand is to try to put distance between Beijing and its main partner, and that is Russia. And so I think there is a conversation to be had here between Berlin and Washington, between Europe and the United States, about whether it is worth trying to pull Russia westward, to improve the relationship with Russia, partly for its own sake, but also partly because it would be part of a broader China strategy. It's something I've been thinking about myself. I don't know whether in Berlin or in Washington this is under active discussion, but I think it should be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would like to know from you, Stefan, as well, talking about Nord Stream 2, just briefly, do you think when the so-called traffic light coalition, potential coalition partners will meet, that will be a major issue at some point of the talks because the Greens don't support Nord Stream 2?
I don't think that it might become, let's say, really a major issue. And I honestly, I don't see that the Greens making such an impact here, having such an impact, let's say, on the Social Democrats. Scholz has been very clear on that, and he was very close to Laschet. Both said actually they're still supportive of Nord Stream 2. And I think
so in either coalition, they face the same problem.
So I think there will not be and they both said, of course, that there is always pointing out, as Berlin did in the past, constantly by trying to escape from this argument that this is, of course, not an economic, but rather a geopolitical issue, always pointing to the fact and hinting to the fact that the EU has done a lot, particularly with regard to energy security, to make sure that there are enough, reflow capabilities and capacities, and to come to the help and the rescue of the Ukraine, let's say in a worst case scenario, when the Ukraine got blackmailed again by Russia, and then immediately, of course, there will be some sort of snapback, and they will put a hold on that. This is what both candidates, the SPD and the CDU candidate, clearly indicated and said several times. So once again, I think I agree. I fully agree with Charles' analysis with regard to Russia. I don't see any changes or any chance for a change, let's say, under Putin in the foreseeable future. And the interesting thing is, I think that has had in the last couple of years a lasting impact also on the Social Democrats, who were always more supportive of some sort of détente and appeasement vis-a-vis the Soviet, the Russia. This is, I think, currently not. Although Scholz explicitly said we still should, of course, engage and engage Russia, as of course with regard to China. But the majority within the party seems to be and has actually currently, I think, also in the SPD, no illusion about Putin's politics, and that there is maybe any kind of rapprochement between the two sides in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
They have become way more pragmatic and realistic on Russia, I think. And it's interesting what word maybe on what Charles just said, that maybe the Biden administration's strategy is really to somehow, I would call it, drive a wedge between, let's say, China and Russia. Interesting to see that this is exactly what China and Russia have been doing over decades with regard to the West and our alliance, actually trying and still doing that, trying to drive a wedge between the two sides.
I would also like, because the time is running, so I would like to also touch on the European Union and the question, Charles, or the wish that you came up with, that Germany should be a strong leader within the European Union. So I just read the description in the Washington Post of Merkel. They described Merkel as the European Union's chief power broker through countless late-night negotiations. So she was the strong leader on the side of France. I'm wondering, a question to both of you. Can you imagine the next Chancellor, Scholz or Armin Laschet, to step in? Or do you think French or French-Italian or French-Greek partnership could be stronger and also probably lead the European Union in a more in a direction where it's more focused on the strategic independence that was mentioned earlier? Maybe Stefan, you want to start?
Yeah, interesting question and difficult to say. Before we answer that, one should maybe first of all see, so what is a legacy more or less of Merkel, and then with regard to Europe and Germany's role in Europe. I think, to me, the most remarkable legacy would certainly be, or is certainly, that under her leadership, how can I say, I think the German government has gained, despite all the crisis and despite, of course, also all the criticism over particular financial crisis, the euro crisis, and also the refugee crisis, nevertheless, at least according to polls in almost every other member state, German government under her has gained the trust and support of most EU citizens. This is quite interesting, who still feel strongly, also according to recent polls, just as she's this chancellorship is coming to an end, feel strongly attached to the European project, and who feel still strongly attached to that. So in their eyes, basically, Germany seems to be, I think this is a bit overestimated, because this is also the picture in the world. Germany seems to be a beacon of Western values, including democracy and the rule of law, as well as the EU's anchor in difficult times as a crisis manager. And this is what she stands for. So
will the next chancellor be strong enough to jump into?
I think there are at least hopes on Germany to defend the European order. This makes Germany maybe a European power par excellence, as a matter of fact. But what that really means, I think there are challenges, because on the other hand, this is an interesting thing, how she managed to do so. On the other hand, I mean, there are crises, there are risks and challenges to all that, and to meet them around and within Europe, I think Germany after Merkel, post-Germany, post-Merkel Germany, will nevertheless have to recalibrate its foreign and European policy strategy, leave a little bit this kind of comfort zone. I mean, nevertheless, and go beyond that. The Merkel era, I think, has been very much marked by the need to keep the EU together, and under intensifying internal and external pressure. And Merkel really excelled at this task and rightly gained actually an appreciation for this across Europe. But this will be not enough, I think, in the future. This is my guess for any government. And next to keeping the EU together, the goal of defending core European values and interests should become the measure of a responsible EU leadership, because I see threats like the breakdown of the rule in the EU between Eastern European countries and members. And so we should not underestimate that. There is, of course, a lot of pressure. And and the second is, of course, I think, nevertheless, the looming on the horizon, what I would call the EU's geopolitical marginalization. And here we come back to China and all these other issues. And I think here we need a clearer, and this is what I meant before, giving up on equidistance between China and the US and all these balancing. We're not in the position to balance all these powers, these great powers. Yeah. We have to really make sure where we are and where we stand.
Charles, I'm wondering, from an American perspective, are there fears what might happen if there is no strong leader or no strong Germany within the European Union? You also mentioned the not so nice diplomatic situation after the Indo-Pacific Security Pact with France. So are you worried if there is no Germany to balance out France within the European Union?
Yeah, I mean, my best guess is that won't happen, and that Germany's ability to anchor Europe stems in part from Germany's size and weight. It's not just Merkel's personality and political skills, and German politics in some ways functions like European politics, and so being able to navigate consensus building in Germany is good preparation for being a consensus builder in Europe. And I don't think anybody else really can play that role. Macron in particular, I mean, he's not really a consensus builder. In some ways, he's the opposite. He has alienated folks by being too headstrong and being kind of Gaullist in his approach to Europe. And Draghi is an important player, but I'm not sure the Italian prime minister really has the weight. So if Berlin didn't play that role, I don't think there would be anybody else to fill the gap. And that would be a problem, because that would lead to a Europe that is adrift. As I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the German government will come together and it will take time to find its way forward. But I'm reasonably confident that Germany will again be the kind of key transatlantic partner and the anchor of Europe. I guess my bigger fear, and this comes to your question, Sonja, about the sub deal, is that changes in American politics, Biden losing the House, Trump getting reelected, the return of America First, over time leads to growing disaffection with the United States, and a narrative, that our partner is is heading off in the wrong direction. So I'm in some ways more worried about that than I am about the loss of German leadership. And I don't know, and maybe Stefan could end by commenting on this, but is there a narrative in the Social Democrats and the left, anything that we should be aware of about the reliability of the United States? Is there deeper questioning about our ability to be a reliable partner, or are those concerns for now put aside because of Biden?
Yeah, please, Stefan, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, this is really hard to tell. As I said, we should not underestimate. We were starting we were mentioning the first reaction by President Biden when he saw the results. I think we should really not underestimate that there are, of course, more America critical voices within the SPD still than in the CDU. There is no doubt about that. Also in leading positions. Mützenich is one, for instance. Mützenich, he will be, I think, play a very prominent role, probably particularly on foreign policy issues. He is a foreign policy expert of the SPD, as you may know. The party leaders, Borjans and Eskens, Kühnert. So there are a couple actually, who are more critical, particular by pointing out that we cannot rely any longer. This is quite paradoxical, particularly for a party like that, which on the other hand, of course, knows and is very much aware of the fact that we still lack the capacity and when we are still, of course, dependent on the US. This is a paradoxical thing about all this discussion about also strategic autonomy. We were referring to that at the very beginning. I mean, and I think this Australian US deal, AUKUS, is a perfect example for that.
And did not Biden's election get Rolf Mützenich and others to sort of rethink and take a different view of this issue?
You mean on the Australian?
No, deal? Just in general. Have you seen critics of the United States moderate their tone in the wake of Biden's election?
Yes, at the very beginning, definitely, of course. There were great hopes and expectations, but that, as I said, the narrative here was pretty much, in particular among the Social Democrats, that the withdrawal from Afghanistan, as well as AUKUS, of course, brought some aware signals of this kind of, they're not taking us seriously and as an ally, and they're not consulting. And this is the old story, of course, well known. Some sort of unilateralism we've come, accustomed to and used to under Trump, and then of course some of its predecessors as well. But the point here is, as a matter of fact, what we need to, but I don't see this kind of thinking, let's say, among the Social Democrats, if at all, rather within the CDU, that I think, to me, to be very frank, the most surprising thing about the Australian-US deal, the upgraded defense partnership between the three countries, was the EU reaction. I mean, even the particular, and I'm saying now the EU reaction, that means the presidents of the Commission and the European Council, who have sharply condemned what they saw as a kind of, snub for the Union, not just for France. But, what I say here is that means I think of the EU as an integrated strategic player, which we are not. Well, we are not, which is indeed the only way for Europeans to have an influence in the world, I'm sure. But in reality, it's not an integrated player yet, of course. When France makes a deal to sell submarines to Australia, by the way, or deploys its Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier to Asia, those are French decisions. not EU decisions, as a matter of fact. So here we have to, we have to become realistic, particularly against the background of a new situation in the world where, of course, as I said, the US has become a global country, saying, of course, we are not the world police any longer, and of course we're pivoting towards Asia Pacific. So what in the hell do you expect from us? So we have to be very careful, and that is why I think at least the German position was well balanced between France and the US in this case, in this particular case, suggesting actually that we should not automatically follow France by arguing and saying strategic autonomy and we can do it all alone without the US and so forth. I think there still is a majority for a well-balanced situation, realizing that we actually need both.
I'm sorry, Stefan, time is running a little out. So I would like to thank you for your answer. I would like to tackle one last question. Already two of our viewers asked about how long it might take to form a coalition. And I would give that to Charles first, because Charles, you said time is running out, probably in the US, because there might be a shift in the political climate and at least time for the Biden administration at one point. So what would you say, how much time do the German parties have to form a government to work together?
Yeah, I would say the sooner the better.
Last time it took 6 months, by the way.
Yeah, 6 months is too long.
Okay.
In fact, I listened carefully to your opening, Sonja, where you said, they had a good meeting last night and then good pictures, and it looks like a coalition could come together. So that was music to my ears, because I really don't think we can afford month after month of drift. And not that a Merkel caretaker government is drift, but we do need to move on, in part because Germany looms large right now as an anchor of the liberal democratic world, in part because the United States continues to face uncertainty on the domestic front. In my view, the big issues for all of us to keep our eyes on are these two bills, the infrastructure bill and the social policy bill. It is about the saving and reviving America's political center, which is about saving American democracy. And so it needs to get passed now so that it's in the bloodstream and average Americans are benefiting from it by the time we get to the midterms. The midterms are an uphill battle. So precisely because of what's going on here in the United States and uncertainties in domestic politics and US foreign policy, the world needs a strong Germany with a new government and its lights on, up and running. Let's get it
traffic lights
tomorrow.
Okay, I hope I didn't promise you too much, and it won't take ages. What do you think, Stefan? How long might it take, and how problematic is it for our foreign policy if it takes maybe 6 months?
Of course, as Charles said, the sooner the better. I think right after, during the election night, at some point, I have the impression, as it was a close race, nevertheless, basically, we won't have a new government before the end of the year. Meanwhile, after 2 or 3 days, I'm more optimistic that it will come maybe even really sooner than we would expect. And the one point is, the reason for that is that I don't see a realistic chance right now for the Jamaica coalition, to be frank, for the very reason that Laschet is losing more and more ground and support within his own party. I mean, you probably heard and got what Mr. Söder said yesterday, actually congratulating Scholz on becoming the new chancellor. So just
to Mr. Söder, he's the CSU, head of the CSU, which is one of the conservative parties in the alliance. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah, thanks for that. So I don't see that. And for that, I think it will come sooner than we expected once the two small parties, the Greens and the FDP, have ended their negotiations, I think we will have a new government sooner than we expected, as I said.
Then we also see clearer on what foreign policy priorities will be, and how the transatlantic relations, hopefully in a good way, will continue and develop. I thank you both very much for all the insights and for your time, of course. And I also want to thank the viewers in the name of the ACG and the Freunde des ACG e.V. That you joined the virtual webinar today. And I wish you a good week. Thank you.